Welcome to the Real Freedom Podcast with your host, Ryan Weimer. Today, I have Heather with me. Heather, how are you?
Hi, great. Happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So Heather is a experienced investor, runs a property management company. How many doors are you guys managing
About
now?
300 right now.
300
Yep,
doors.
we're up to 300.
Just in Boise.
Boise, Nampa, Caldwell, yeah. So
Okay.
Ada and Canyon counties.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So I am going to dive deep with Heather on a little bit about her story, property management. This is a bit of a, I'll say, taboo subject when it comes to people starting out, right? Property management, self-managing, triumphs, failures. We're going to get into all of it today. So are you ready?
I am ready. Let's
Perfect.
dive in.
Okay. So every episode we love to start with this. What has been your most beautiful failure so far?
In all honesty, I feel like our most beautiful failure, I can think back on little stories or little, experiences, but overall, if I could come up with an overarching theme, it is knowing when to cut ties with maybe a client that isn't a good fit. If I have somebody that, I perhaps I really care about something that the tenant is going through, but the owner isn't willing to work with this tenant, and we're trying to advocate for both sides. We have a fiduciary duty to the owner, but we might have an ethical duty to the tenant. And just being able to say, you know what, this isn't working out, and backing off and parting ways.
So firing bad owners is what I'm hearing you saying.
That's the PC. Yeah, that's the less PC way to say it. But yeah, exactly. And it's not just owners. It's also, if we have a real estate client, if we're just not seeing eye to eye, or somebody's being really difficult, if you have a vendor who's not willing to communicate properly with our staff or is undermining things that we're doing, just being able to part ways early on when you see, like, if you get those feelings that something's just not quite right, it's probably not, and it's not going to go away. And just being able to step away earlier rather than later.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
That is such a hard thing to do, I'm sure, right? So full transparency, guys, Heather runs Cohesion Property Management, which is a part of Boise Turnkey.
Yes. Yep.
And how many of our doors do you manage now? Like 30 or 40?
I think,
including the multifamily stuff?
Yeah, probably around
Pretty
there.
close.
I should know that off the top of my head,
Yeah,
but I don't.
maybe it's a little less, but Heather is far and away, and this is a shameless plug.
Uh-oh.
There's a reason why you're on the show today.
Thank you.
I have worked with quite a few property management companies, and Heather is far and away, like, head and shoulders above everybody else. And as you were just talking about that and how, learning to cut ties with owners is one of the biggest failures. As an investor, I know people listening to this would be like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound very owner friendly. Mm-hmm. And here's the secret, guys. And I know you're going to dive into this. Heather so deeply cares about her tenants and the owners. That's what makes this such a fruitful thing, right? People don't, and I'm trying not to get too soapboxy or ranty here, but this is the secret, right? Yeah. It's genuinely caring about people. When you care about people, guess what? They become a lot easier to work with, a lot more cooperative. They take better care of your property, right? They pay on time. They communicate if there's some kind of issue. And I think that's the thing. Investors have this frame of like, well, this is transactional. Well, how much does it cost? Mm-hmm. How much does it cost?
What's my bottom line?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And they can't zoom out and see all the costs that are associated with a bad tenant or self-managing. So just to dive a little bit deeper into that biggest failure, can you talk about times where maybe you haven't gotten rid of an owner or had a situation, right? And that, months go by and then you're like, oh gosh, what have we gotten into?
Yeah, I actually have one friend of mine. This happened earlier this year, actually. We had a gentleman who slipped on some ice, had a catastrophic shattering of his knee.
A tenant?
A tenant.
Okay.
The owners of the property, meanwhile, almost at the exact same time, have decided that they wanted to relocate, and they have to find, the biggest and best property in Park City. And that price point means they have to immediately sell this house. And it doesn't matter that the tenant had rights to the property according to the lease agreement that the owners had previously advocated for. They wanted a full year, which would take him through the end of September. And they're coming to me in late February, early March saying, we don't care that he fell on our property. We don't care that he's injured. I need to start selling this property and I need to start marketing it and we need to have open houses and this, that, and the next. So meanwhile, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I need to advocate for this tenant and I need to, he genuinely was bedridden for almost 6 weeks, just, immobile. And it was on their property. You would think that they would have, a little epiphany that, oh my goodness, let's not push the issue. He already fell on our property. What if there's some sort of liability that we, aren't skirting? But no, they marched forward. And so my posture very quickly became, okay, so here are your rights. Here is what the lease says. We need to work in this way. We've done this before. We've sold properties with tenants in place before. We work with investors. So we understand that sometimes a 1031 may need to happen. So that's not the problem. But the problem was how irrational they were about this tenant's personal situation. Mm-hmm. And, then the things started happening with, we noticed that at the open house, he was still in the property. Yeah, of course he was in the property. Well, evidently the potential buyer overheard him saying that the central vac doesn't work properly. This was the risk that we talked about.
Yeah.
So I was feeling very concerned that lines were going to be crossed about, the owners overstepping, or perhaps the agent that they hired being inappropriate and demanding too much, or not respecting a 24-hour guideline for showings.
Yep.
So in my brain, I'm thinking, I'm going to help this tenant. I'm just going to, I'll educate the owners and I'll try to keep things in line, but I'm also going to be the tenant's advocate. And it went on like this for a while. And it just got to the point that things were getting worse and worse. And I really should have just, listen, no, this is not going to happen. If you go to market the property, I can't manage for you anymore. I can't be this middle person.
Yeah.
And I should have done it earlier. I don't think that the property ever sold.
Okay.
I don't know. But just those kind of situations are just.
Yeah. Common sense is uncommon sometimes.
That's
right?
Probably a good way to say it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one step back, how did you get started in property management? Because I think this is a big thing to tackle. And I think it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of resolve. It takes sort of this managing of both sides, the investor, the tenant, finding that middle ground. Because at the end of the day, you are an investor yourself.
Right.
Right? And you guys have how many properties?
We have about 25 doors right now. Yeah.
Okay. So you know both sides very, very well.
Yeah.
Talk to me about taking that on.
Oh, goodness. The origin story.
Yes.
In all honesty, when Corby, my husband, and I moved in together, we had a very different frame of mind. I was immediately going to sell my house. I didn't want to deal, you only have one house in your lifetime, right? So I have to sell this other one in order for us to move into the new one. He had a very different opinion and held on to his first purchase. And I was that reptile brain, fight or flight or flee. I just stuck my head in the sand like an ostrich and said, nope, I don't want anything to do with it. If you're going to hold on to this property, it's on you.
Which is a very common thing, by the way, between spouses.
It is.
Right?
Yep.
One of the spouses comes with a new idea, a new thing to get into. It's scary. It's the unknown, right?
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing that because this is a real thing.
Well, it is. And it's, he was the rich dad before I even knew what that was, right? And I was the poor dad because I had been raised by
of course.
Children that were immigrants and first generation farmers after anyway, we can go down that. But so my background was very much, you rely on an employer to help fund your retirement, and that's the only thing that's sure. So if you have these other investments, what happens if there's a month where the tenant doesn't pay?
Right.
You are living paycheck to paycheck. So how on earth are you going to pay for this other mortgage? And so all of those kind of fears fed into Corby self-managing his original property.
And did you know about property management at the time?
Oh, no.
Okay. So it was just like, We're bootstrapping this thing. We're just figuring it out as we go.
Very much
Right?
so.
It's just taking action, right? Even though it was
Yep.
scary.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was, when did we put that one into service? Probably about 21 about 21 years ago. So he stepped in, and we made some mistakes, I should say. I always own it. It wasn't me, it was him.
Yeah.
So, known fact.
Well, there is that element of that, right? Hey, you got us into this, or this was your idea. I'm just being,
Totally.
I'm just keeping it real, right?
Yeah.
This is a normal thing with spouses. And then, okay, you go through some failures, some unexpected things come up. Oh my gosh, we didn't know that there was, a plumbing leak here or whatever. And you're bootstrapping and you don't have a ton in reserves, right? So every little thing is a bigger thing.
I mean, at that point, I was a teacher and he was working for the Special Olympics. So he had this nonprofit position. We weren't making a ton of money at all. We were making a comfortable amount to pay for our mortgage and perhaps to squirrel away some deferred maintenance funds for this other property. That was really an eye-opening experience when that one went downhill. He didn't know how to screen. He didn't know how to place this tenant, and we had the first catastrophic failure was, oh my gosh, the property is looking kind of bad. Why is it going downhill so quickly? Oh, why was the front door kicked in? Turns out she had been in jail for 2 months had let boyfriend and all of his other counterparts squat there. And so, exactly, a lesson in what not to do. And all of the failures that I was worried about kind of came to fruition. We had it was just surface at the time, but it was like $6,000, which back then was significant and, inflated to today's, the repair cost to get that back to rent ready was significant for us.
Surely after an experience like this, you gave up and said real estate doesn't work.
It's not for me.
Yeah.
No, he was like, let's jump in again. Let's give it a shot. Now that I've fixed it up, let's give it another whirl. And that tenancy was much better.
Okay.
It wasn't great. It wasn't a home run, but it was much better. And
how did he get your buy-in? Right?
Again, Ostrich. It was an Ostrich moment. I just nope. Okay, you know what not to do. And so we did that. And then a little bit later on, I started paying attention to some of the numbers. I'm definitely a numbers gal. In our couplehood, I'm much more of the integrator and the detail person. He's more of the visionary. And so when I started paying attention to us doing our property taxes and the depreciation, or I should say just taxes in general and the depreciation, I really realized we're doing everything wrong, but somehow we're still making money over here. So maybe there is something to this thing. And being teachers, or in the nonprofit world, we were able to have our summers to kind of delve into real estate a little bit more. And we picked up another property, worked on it to rehab it all summer, put another renter in there, and that situation turned out to be great. Then the next summer we picked up another one. And then we just kind of were like, is this beyond us? Should we be maybe consulting with a property manager? Because now we have a few doors. And what we didn't like was having that, like a direct personal connection with the tenant. The tenant knows that I own the property. And so come renewal, if I needed to raise it because my property taxes went up significantly, or we put in a lawn and the water bill is crazy.
Yep.
Or, these kind of things. We want to take care of the property and in turn, obviously, the tenants as well. But that comes at a cost.
Sure.
I can't subsidize people's, tenancy. Yeah. So if I needed to bump the rent up $50, they knew that it was me personally. They knew that Heather and Corby were the ones bumping up the rent. And that just felt unfair. No, man, this is a numbers game.
Yeah.
And so we started realizing that we needed kind of a level of
buffer.
Anonymity.
Yes.
Yeah, we needed just to, and after 3 doors, we were also thinking, this is something that, what if we, later on down the line, what if we have kids? How are we going to protect those assets away from our personal, how do we put this in a trust? How do we structure this stuff so it's working for us and best protected? So we started Cohesion Properties, which is now officially Boise Turnkey Property Management. We're, a fully rebranded and partnering with that. But we started Cohesion Properties because the co is Corby, the he is Heather, and we were this, little property management
Yeah.
company. And it was just for us. It was just, like, okay, we're kind of getting our feet underneath us and we know how to do this thing. But then, through talking with other people, oh, well, you do that? Well, do you think that you can manage my aunt's property? She needs help with this, or the next. And so it just kind of grew organically, in all honesty. But the initial setup was we learned what we didn't know,
Mm-hmm.
and we learned what we needed to do to develop that buffer. And then also just moving forward and being able to have something that could potentially work for us as well. We did not have the intention to formally manage 300 assets for people. We really didn't. We just wanted our own little thing.
Yeah.
And fast forward, I was a teacher. I think I mentioned that. Absolutely love the profession. I still identify as a teacher, not a property manager, because no little girl grows up to, I want to be a property manager, right?
Right. Yeah.
They don't realize what they're missing. But we had our first child in 2012.
Yep.
And I couldn't go back to a classroom. I had my perfect student at home. I needed to be there with him.
Mm-hmm.
So that was when I really decided to go all in and pick up those little, a couple contracts here, a couple contracts there. And there are so many bad players, so many bad actors out there in property management because it's not licensed. You don't have to have, any kind of education, certification. You don't have to have anything in Idaho.
Which is crazy, by the way. Like,
It's
this is
nuts.
literally someone's shelter.
Right.
This is a basic human need.
Right.
It'd be like food not being regulated.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, or water.
Yeah,
Seriously.
yeah.
It's a weird thing.
Well, and asset management, I mean, if you think about it for other people, you're managing their assets, right? You would think that would come with some sort of education or credentialing, and there's not.
Yeah.
Hence, we were born to try to offer a service that we saw a need for. And we quickly found the NARPM network of support here in town, the Southwest chapter, and we quickly found that there were a lot of good players. You just hear about those negative experiences all the time.
Of course. And not only that, it's the negative experiences feed into that fear, right? If you hear 10 positive things and one negative thing, that negative thing in your brain is going to carry the same
So
amount of
much
weight
more.
or even more than the 10 positive things.
For sure.
And for those of you that haven't seen episode 8, I believe it was with Corby, make sure that you check that one out too, because I think getting your side of the story as well, and how you guys grew this together as you were talking kind of about going back and having that aha moment when you looked at the numbers, right?
Yeah.
So a common thing with spouses is usually one person's into the numbers, the other person is not. And that creates some friction, right? I think too, tax code in and of itself, I don't know how many pages it is with the IRS. It's unrealistic to read. But a lot of times when people are like, oh, you didn't pay anything in taxes?
Yeah.
What what kind of offshore accounts do you have?
Yeah.
What kind of scam are you
Right.
running here? How did you?
Right.
And it's just from a lack of understanding.
Yeah.
So is that maybe something that you were born with about just being curious about getting into the numbers? Or was there kind of a moment with you guys as a couple where it was like, hey, if we really want to do this together, we have to just be open to really understanding it? Was there that kind of moment?
To be honest, I don't think so. I think that I hate to say it, but I think that I was just, ignorance is bliss. And I'm just going to go teach in my classroom and have my community of students and the educators that I loved. And that filled my cup. And when I came home, Corby, our relationship fills our cup in many other ways, of course. And this investment was just kind of hanging out. And I just didn't really dive into it. There was the taxes moment, when we were looking at those numbers, that was as much of an aha as I needed. And I didn't feel like there was any friction. I didn't feel like it was, I told you so or anything like that. I think that it was just, okay, well, tell me, how did we do this year? This tenant seems to be much better. We didn't have this catastrophic situation where we had to serve her notice in jail and we had this massive rehab bill.
Yep.
So maybe this year is a little better. And then going through those numbers and actually seeing that, and then the light bulb and the click kind of went off. And that was when it was like, oh yeah, you were doing everything wrong, but here we are.
Yeah. Well, and it's, you got started in 2012 to 2002 to 2003.
Yeah.
Then 2012, you have your first child.
Yeah.
That's 10 years, right? And I don't want to skip over that because
Right.
all of a sudden in 2012, 10 years later, you have a few doors, not many still, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then all of a sudden, I have the ability to do something else that can give me some time flexibility in this. And that is really the power of real estate, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you blink and it's really been 10 years,
right.
which is not a blink. That's a while. But in that context, all of a sudden you just get that time back. And you don't, it's not something people really struggle even thinking about next week or next month. Mm-hmm. Year over year, real estate just keeps getting better and better and better.
Right. And I like, I guess the elephant that we haven't talked about yet is that those years spanned the 2007, 2008, the huge crash.
Yeah.
And so looking at the investments that we did make at that time, we had 3 doors. And at that time, it was incredibly eye-opening. You know, everybody's scared. Everybody's running. We had friends that were fairly new graduates from college getting into their first home. And I actually had a conversation with one of my really good friends at the time saying, I think I'm just going to walk away because it's better and the bank will take it on as a short sale. And then I don't have to do anything. And just trying to this is your mindset right now.
Yeah.
Like this is where Americans were at the time. And it was really scary. But for us, looking at those numbers during that crash, we still had somebody that was housed in a good, safe unit with landlords that were incredible and
paying the rent, right?
Right.
You didn't really care about the values as much. Yeah,
exactly. And the rents, for the most part in Boise, were fairly stable. There wasn't a massive crash in rents. There was just the massive real estate downturn. So we still had our mortgages fairly covered. And everybody kind of just hunkered down and stayed put. We didn't have a lot of vacancies. So we weathered this huge storm. And it didn't really matter if we were upside down in the most recent purchase because we had it covered.
Yep.
And it was, wow, okay, we can do this. We really can. When we had our first child, we bought 2 duplexes that same year. So we went from 3 doors to 7.
Wow.
And that's when I really stepped in and started managing and taking off from there and having that perspective of you can always, the best time to plant a tree was a decade ago. And oh my gosh, my husband did that for us and I didn't even appreciate it at the time.
Yeah. So I think fast forwarding to now. At Offer Now Idaho, we're looking to hire A players to run our organization and help us grow our business. Corey, why would somebody want to work with Offer Now Idaho?
Do you want to be challenged? Do you want to grow? Do you want to have people in your culture push you to be the best version of yourself? I do. And that's why I'm here. And in addition to that, do you want to have the chance at growing long-term generational wealth? That's all a possibility with a company that's small, cares about you, and wants you to be able to invest in real estate.
What's something that separates Offer Now Idaho from any other real estate company?
It's really rare to find a company that can help you get into a home. Sure, they might throw a few thousand into a 401k that you can access when you're 65. How many people are going to help you either provide a rental property or a shelter over your own head? Through our off-market home buying program, we assist our employees in buying properties once they've achieved certain levels within the company. And that's really unique to people because you get that asset. You get to do whatever you want with it. And you're buying an off-market discounted property to improve the quality of your life and your family's life.
Yeah, not only that, we offer benefits and we have a very challenging and high growth energy startup feel to our work environment. So we are looking for people that want to make over 6 figures a year. Right now, we have a $3,000 referral program. If you know somebody that's looking for a new role, we will pay you $3,000 once that person is hired by us and they hit their 90-day mark. So if you know of anybody that's looking for a new job or looking to change their life, shoot me a DM at RealRyanWeimer on Instagram.
Let's get it.
Crazy roller coaster of a market the last 5 years, right?
Oh, yeah.
In Idaho.
Yeah. Yes.
So we saw an insane amount of appreciation during COVID.
Mhm.
Then we saw when interest rates rose or doubled, essentially. Then
Yeah.
we've seen the opposite thing. We came down almost 26% in price in 2022 from peak. Since then, it's gotten a little bit more stable and gotten back to where it was. Talk to me about that journey on the rent side of things,
Yeah.
because that's been quite a shock to the system.
Right. And I think so through COVID, Boise especially was one of the fastest growing metro markets. So we had people that wanted our lifestyle. They wanted to be able to access the foothills and social distance on their mountain bikes, right?
Yep.
They wanted to be able to go fishing in the Boise River in downtown. They wanted to, and they were allowed to work remotely. So we had this massive influx of people move to the area. Well, what does that do to your rents? It goes crazy.
Yeah.
And so for those years, we definitely saw exponential rent rates.
Yeah, like what? Like almost 10% annually, it seemed.
I wish that I had those numbers off the top of my head, but easily. There were some units that we were renting previously for $2,000, let's say a nice 4-bedroom on
Sure.
the bench or something for $2,000. During COVID, that would have gone for 27.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's more than 10%.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and, that might be an anomaly, but really people, when they're sheltering in place, right, they have to homeschool in place. They have to work. And
Yeah.
they wanted those A-class rentals, and they weren't traveling. They weren't able to spend their money on going out to eat and going to movies.
Yep.
So they were going to dump that money into rent. Or if you were coming up and working remotely from the Bay Area, but you have the Bay Area salary, you can afford anything here.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and that created a lot of other ripples and a lot of other problems for the locals that maybe they didn't have that same salary and they couldn't keep up with the rent inflation. But so what are we seeing now? Last year, around August, we saw a pretty big demand fall.
Yep.
And that kind of coincides with school getting back in session. So that's like a normal seasonal thing. However, this year we're seeing at best a third of the traffic to the ads that we would see in May or June. So it seems instead of just like a seasonal drop off, it feels like it's a cliff.
Wow. Okay. So more than a seasonal drop off. Now, do you think
Significantly.
Do you still hear about people moving here?
Yes, but definitely not like we saw
Not
before.
near the clip. Yeah.
No,
Yep.
not at all. We have had people, so the tenants that were relocating here, if they're still here, they may have moved in a roommate. They may have moved somebody else in with them or maybe a family member. We're seeing a lot of, with these prices, which I should back up just a minute and say the prices are now, I wouldn't say it's not a cliff in prices, right?
Right.
But I would say that it is coming back to what should have been our homeostasis. So
Right.
if we're seeing 5 to 6% increase in rents, historically, that's it was that massive spike. And now we're kind of coming down to what it should be, more of the homeostasis. So that same property that I was quoting before, it was 2,000. COVID hit, it went up to 25, 26, 2,700. Now it's probably going to be 2295, something like that.
Okay.
So it's more reasonable, but it's also, if you were to back up 5 years, you're probably looking at that
Trajectory.
reasonable trajectory.
Right.
Yeah.
It's that shift in expectations, though, that I think people get bombarded because things have reverted back to the mean and probably where they should be.
Right.
So it's not necessarily that we're seeing huge rent decline right now. It's that we're seeing that kind of equilibrium, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe longer days to get things rented. Of course, we have the seasonal element right now where it's like soon as school's back in session, which, by the way, I didn't know, Idaho schools start early, especially in Boise. They're
In
second
the
week of August.
Yeah, the in the valley we're looking at usually the 14th, 15th of August now.
Yeah.
They made that shift.
Yeah. So if your place isn't rented by end of July, you're going to feel that some element of that, and it's going to get
Most likely.
progressively worse. I did actually want to talk about classes of properties and where rent is being affected the most, right? So you have your A-class properties, super nice. Those are like 4-bed and up.
Yep.
A lot of which are in like Eagle, Boise, Meridian. They're usually newer properties.
Yes.
And then you have your B class, then you have your C class. I don't think we have a ton of D class in just in this valley in general. Like we don't
no.
have any war zones,
No.
which is why Boise is so awesome because the
Right.
crime rate is so
Yeah.
low. But let's talk about how rent has been affected across those different asset classes and also how vacancy has been affected.
Sure. I think that I will go back to also the COVID years, right?
Yes.
When people wanted, maybe they were B class type renters, right? And B class I kind of equate to more of like the bread and butter, right? So it's a 3-bed home. It might have a 2-car, 1-car garage, something like that. Just a basic yard, but a nice, reliable property.
Sure. And in what location?
B class is everywhere, really.
Okay.
I mean, it's pretty widespread. You could have potentially a B class multifamily as well. It doesn't
Sure.
have to be, and there are growing segments of A class multifamily as well,
Sure.
depending on the high rises in downtown or
Sure.
things like that. But B class is kind of bread and butter, right? And those have, by and large, held their value. Or their rental rate. Again, it's kind of a softening right now because we're coming back to what should be, considered that
Sure.
that norm or
Yeah.
that trajectory.
And that softening can mean just like longer days to get rented.
Sure.
Not a huge difference in price, maybe seasonally lower $50 to $100 a month, but
right.
just longer days to get it rented.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
How
right.
about A class?
A class has been hit hard.
Okay.
It's been hit really hard. So folks that put a 5-bedroom plus a media room and 3 or 4-car garage, the HOA pool, all of the bells and whistles, that's where people wanted to live during COVID. Right. And these are the types of, it's 2 or 3 years old. It's just mint. It's gorgeous.
Yep.
They wanted to live there during COVID and they were going to pay the $2,800 or $3,000. Great. Well, now that we're seeing that softening, not correction, but now that we're seeing that kind of that trending down, those properties might be renting for $200, $300 less.
Yep.
And especially seasonally, another thing that we're starting to see, we have that A-class property type. We just listed a property in Meridian, again, really nice. I think the property is 8 to 10 years old, something along those lines. 4 bedrooms plus a bonus space. I think it's a 3-car garage. Corner lot, really nice. What we would have priced at $2,700 easy all day long a couple years ago, we were struggling to get it rented at $2,395. And we ended up offering incentives, which is something they're seeing a lot more now also, that $500 off your first month rent or 2 weeks free, something along those lines. And in fact, the national trend, especially in this softened fall market, I was just listening to another property manager that stated one of the averages in the Denver area for multifamily, so apartments, is a bonus of 8 weeks free.
Wow,
Which is
2 months.
insane to me. Yeah. But just, getting somebody in the door and then hoping that you can serve them really well so that you want to retain them so that there isn't another vacancy going forward.
Man, this is everything you guys have to know about getting into real estate, about how COVID was not
It was great
the
while
rule.
it lasted,
It was the
man.
exception. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Man,
Yeah.
yeah. I know we're gonna be looking back on those days and be like, man, that was really when it was crazy.
That was interesting.
Yeah.
I think that if people go into investing with the mindset that, so also that none of this to say that an A-class rental is bad. That's not a bad investment at all because those are also probably seeing more appreciation, right?
Right. They're in better locations as well.
They're in better locations. So
Yep.
you're going to have more long-term benefits. So keep your eye on the end game, right? It's a marathon.
Yes.
It's not a sprint. And for an investor that's starting off, maybe you start by picking up a C-class property or a B-class duplex, but maybe diversifying and sprinkling in an A-class rental here or a C-class fourplex there, something like that, because then you're going to be more equally balanced if something else comes up where
Sure.
there is a downturn.
Yeah. Because those C-class properties, those tend to be, more of your like blue collar type of,
Could
workers
be. Mhm.
could be, but this is a lower end, usually at median rent or below.
Mhm.
And these price points tend to be the least affected in any kind of downturn because it's that more affordable pricing.
Yep, exactly. So they've by and large been more stable than even the B class, as you said. And I mean, the demographic there, it could be somebody who's looking for student housing. It could be somebody who, the fallout from COVID, they got a divorce and now they're looking to just have their 1-bedroom man cave or, whatever it is. You're not looking at necessarily a lesser quality tenant either. You're just, it's just a different a point of entry.
Yeah. And we've had conversations too about this. Before I actually go into that, vacancy rates in Ada and Canyon County, what kind of differences are you seeing there?
So it's a little hard to speak to that with a full amount of confidence right now. So the Southwest chapter of NARPM has been doing vacancy polls for years. I mean, I think we have data going back the better part of a decade now. And our sample size used to be really large and really robust. And we had a couple of key players that just kind of bailed. Don't know what happened. Don't know if it was just, a shift of position in the company or whatever.
Yep.
So our pool of data went from 8,000 units down to 4,500 units.
Wow. Why is that?
I think that they just aren't reporting for whatever reason. They just aren't reporting.
Huh.
So some of the bigger players just haven't been.
Maybe they don't want to report
data.
lower rents, or
I don't know.
Very interesting.
It is interesting. It's I wish that we could needle that a little bit more, but in general, we saw a leveling out of maybe 2 to 3% vacancy between Caldwell, Nampa, and Boise Meridian. But lately, we've seen it kind of shift back to higher 6-7% in Caldwell, Nampa, and 2-3% in Boise. So I suspect that that's probably sample size related, because if you dive down and look into the actual metrics and the numbers, Canyon has shrunk pretty significantly with that lack of reporting.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're saying the truth is probably somewhere in the middle.
Probably.
It's probably not this wide gap, because 2 to 3 is still historically low. 2 to 3% vacancy rate. I mean, gosh, that's anything sub 5 is
pretty great.
Incredible. And given the circumstances right now, that would be a little bit of a surprise with kind of this equilibrium adjustment that we've seen. So you're saying the truth is probably vacancy rates are a little bit better in Canyon County than they're currently being reported just because of the sample size.
I would guess so.
Okay.
And I feel like with 300 doors, we don't have a massive portfolio to report on, but we are seeing the trends, and we speak to other property managers and hey, how's your listing out on this, so we have those kind of points of contact, and I would venture to say it's probably a little bit better than what the numbers are showing.
Yeah. But this is why having somebody like Heather is so important to have as a property manager, because she gets the investor side, right? Like, you actually care enough to make those extra calls. Hey, what are we seeing? Because I think I actually emailed you about this, and I saw people posting in the Boise, Idaho real estate investor Facebook group, those headlines of the vacancy rates. Oh my gosh, what's happening in Canyon County? Vacancy rates haven't been this high in a long, long time. And you're the one with the actual data in the background. Like, wait a minute, there's some reporting nuances going on here. But I'll tell you, that really translates to our off-market properties that we wholesale to buyers, both flippers and long-term buyers. A lot of them are like, no, I'm not going to touch anything in Canyon County right now.
Because they got scared off.
Yeah, those headlines really shock people. It's a classic clickbait. Not that those are designed for clickbait, but I think this is so important. Like, when you have, it doesn't matter if it's an agent, a property manager, like somebody with an investor background like Heather. This is everything to understand the context of what's really going on, because if everybody else is seeing that and veering one way, I would look at that as opportunity.
It could be.
Way less competition right now.
Right. Yeah, it could be.
Yeah. I want to touch on how I look at managing and how we have conversations about managing the portfolio now, right? There's a time to get aggressive with rent increases.
Sure.
And there's a time to let's do whatever we can to get this renewed.
Yeah.
Right. We are in a season right now, and have been in the last year and a half, where renewals, let's not push the rents. Let's just avoid vacancies at all costs, because at the end of the day, that's going to make more money in your pocket, more money in my pocket, and be a better investment. One of the best hacks that seems obvious, but if you're listening to this and you either self-manage or you have a property manager that doesn't do this, is to line up these leases in the spring and early summertime.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Company-wide, we had a goal. We looked at our renewal rate last year, and we noticed, okay, prices are falling, rent prices are falling, things have been softening for a little bit, and we saw this trend. And we looked at our overall renewal rate. And company-wide, we were at about 55% renewal rate.
Wow.
Now, that's actually better than the national trend.
Wow,
the national
really?
trend is 50. So while we still inched out ahead, 2023 was, in my opinion, not a success because of that.
That seems low.
It is.
Yeah.
It feels, and it felt low. And there's your heaviest lifting is when there's a vacancy, both on the property management side and also on the owner, because we're going to you and the cost of flooring, the cost of paint, the cost of everything has skyrocketed. Labor, showing the property. Oh my goodness, it's so much. It's
Sure.
so much. Let's just coast. Let's just freeze the rents. Let's keep our tenants happy, and let's just renew. So this year, company-wide, we set a goal to 70% renewal.
Nice.
So 20% above the national average, right?
Yep.
And right now we're at 80.4%.
Wow.
I know. So
Incredible.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
We're super proud about it. But in all honesty, it's those educational pieces. It's being able to sit down with an owner and saying, hey, look at what this cost could be. Do you really need that extra $50 in rent a month? Or can we just freeze it, keep our tenants happy, keep the property up to date, and renew this lease? Now, when we're doing that renewal, we're also going to be thinking ahead, because we have noticed the last couple of years, August is trash for renewals.
Wow,
and
yeah.
it's just this cliff
Yep.
this year. So instead of coming, if you had a lease that ended in July or a lease that ended in September, we're going to encourage you to give us the authority to sign a 10-month lease and just to cycle it back into maybe May.
Love it.
End
Yeah.
of May, something
Yep.
like that. And that sets you up, and potentially, honestly, the tenants as well,
Yes.
right? Because then there's going to be more properties on the market if they do need to move, or that's a better time of year than, if school had started or whatnot. So setting everybody up for that April, May, June cycle
Yes.
instead. And honestly, even earlier is better. If you can eke out to the end of February, then you're
Totally.
listing in March. That's still fine.
Absolutely.
All
Yeah.
of those kind of components go into that school of thought. But I mean, again, numbers don't lie.
Yeah.
55% renewal last year, and not good. in
Right. And not all
August.
classes created equal, right? A lot of this is this equilibrium resetting where, these people, maybe they have to go back to the office now because of COVID. Maybe they're just not spending as much time at home.
Right.
They're out back doing stuff again, living life normally, and they have less money to pay with rent, right? And so
Yeah.
this A class is really probably contributing a large amount in those turnovers,
Yeah.
more so than a B or C
Right.
class would.
Yeah, definitely. Most definitely. A lot of those executive style rentals that were just, upper echelon and so desirable. And if we were renting it for $2,800 and it came on the market, well, now we're listing it for $23.95. And that feels like a failure.
Yeah.
That's hard. That's
Yeah.
a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah. So let's kind of segue to some landlord mistakes.
Okay.
I can share quite a few.
Uh-oh.
What are some of the most common landlord mistakes that you see? Maybe it's in pricing, maybe it's in expectations, maybe it's in elements of the property that they don't rehab. What are some things that come
Sure.
to mind?
The first thing that comes to mind is if somebody is self-managing a property, I almost always hear them say, how do I choose a tenant? How do I pick a tenant? And those words are like fingernails on a chalkboard to me because you don't choose. You don't pick, or you shouldn't. So if you're self-managing and you are choosing or picking a tenant, you're not doing it right.
Yeah. If you're asking that question,
Yeah.
you should not be self-managing.
Right. And the biggest reason is you don't want to show favoritism. You don't want to violate any fair housing. You want to have a checklist going in, and you want to be as transparent about your criteria as possible. And, it doesn't matter if you have somebody who, let's say your rental criteria is 700 for a credit score, and they have to have 3 times the monthly income. Okay, great. Does it really matter if they have 2 kids and a dog? You know, or are you stuck on having that young professional that is the only person that is going to be living in the property? If you do that, you're starting to compare.
The slippery
And
slope.
it's a
Yeah.
very slippery slope. And that person who was the young professional, you know, maybe they had an ethnic last name and maybe you chose somebody else instead because you chose. If you're doing that, you are opening yourself up to all sorts of potential pitfalls and failures.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think going to the age-old question of should I self-manage or should I use a property manager, you've done both.
Yeah.
Now, here's something that I see all the time. I'm a little bit biased, but I'll tell you the number one reason why I see people that either give up in real estate or they fail in real estate, an overwhelming majority are because they've self-managed. Why? Because they didn't know how to properly qualify the tenant, right? So what they did is they looked at it and said, 8 to 10% of monthly rents? I can't afford that, right? Cash flow is really hard in Boise, let alone the rest of the valley.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to make up to that mortgage. I need to find ways to that extra $150, $200 a month really matters.
Yeah.
I can't afford it.
Yep.
So then they bootstrap it. They get any kind of, maybe they put out a Craigslist ad. Maybe
Right.
they put something on Facebook Marketplace.
Yep.
Maybe somebody's friend knows of a friend.
Yep.
They put them in there. They may or may not have a lease agreement, right? And then all of a sudden, 2 months in, there's problems. Either they're not paying, maybe the property becomes a little bit damaged. There's no systems in place. There's no reminders. How do you collect payment? And so what happens is they, all these things.
Yep.
So then they throw their hands up in the air and they're like, this doesn't work. And it's really hard to watch because I could have told you that was going to happen. Now, I'm not saying that happens to everybody, but if you self-manage long enough and you don't know how to properly qualify a tenant and get the right person in there, this is the biggest reason why people give up.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me to watch because I'm like, I know it costs you 8 to 10% up front, but you're not thinking about all the damage that it's costing you later. It's significantly more money. I mean, just an eviction, it's minimum 60 days, minimum.
Yeah.
Plus, $2,000 to $3,000. Plus, if there's any damage caused,
Right.
you're talking $10,000 usually.
Yeah. To get something back rent ready, and it's very time consuming, and it's that ounce of prevention and properly screening your tenants could have prevented all of it.
Yeah, and this is Idaho too,
Yeah.
so eviction laws are landlord friendly, and you can get people out earlier if you're in another state.
Right.
I mean, it could be 3 months, 6 months, or longer.
Yeah.
It's just something you have to really, really take seriously. This is why I exclusively use property managers because I've just seen too many bad stories. Yeah.
Yeah. It's you'd be surprised how many people are like, oh yeah, my sister's uncle's friend is, he's a really good guy and I'm just going to move him in. Okay. Now you have somebody, we actually were trying to take over a person who was self-managing, and it was a friend of a friend or something. And no, we didn't need to screen him, but I got him to sign a lease.
Yep.
Well, he has 2 dogs on the property. It's a duplex. He has 2 dogs on the property that don't allow anybody near the door. So we're trying to show the property, the other unit, and dogs are, on guard. Or the person is a smoker. Or hanging flags that maybe present a certain
Oh boy, yeah, I've seen that.
present a certain political affiliation or mindset,
Extremist
I should say.
affiliation,
Exactly. And they're immediately, people don't want to rent it because they see what they smell it, they see it, the dogs are coming after them like, no wonder it's not renting.
Yeah.
This other unit is a great product, but
Well, and guess what? Our most common avatar in the off-market space is of a distressed seller. It's a tired landlord.
Oh, okay.
It is this exact type of person.
Yeah.
They generally tend to be a little bit older. They rent it to friends and family members. That's the most common thing.
Yeah.
Somebody stops paying, something happens. They don't have the finances to cover both.
Yeah.
That person may or may not be taking care of the property. They're usually not on a written lease. Like these are the types of people that I'm telling you, this is the most common avatar of somebody that has to sell a property at a discount is because they didn't do this property management stuff correctly. And I'm not trying to to scare people out there,
Yeah.
but I am trying to give you the knowledge and information so that you can set yourself up for long-term success.
Right.
If it doesn't cash flow in year 1 or year 2, you have to be okay with that.
Right.
Right? You have to be financially viable. You have to think long-term
Mhm.
if you're going to invest in a market that, quite honestly, is more prone to appreciation or has more upside than other markets, right? You can go to the Midwest, you can cash flow
Right.
way more and just not have appreciation and not have upside.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And Boise has that. I think that we're still at a reasonable point of entry, but we do have that great appreciation that helps, offset your maybe your pain point of not having immediate cash flow or as much cash flow as you want.
Yeah. Let's talk about other landlord mistakes. I got a really good one that
Ooh,
really grinds my
great.
gears. Okay. Being stuck on a rent price.
Oh, yep.
So let's say I got a house, it doesn't matter what time of year it is, but this tends to happen more in fall and winter,
Mhm.
right? I'm looking at what places rented for in May, June, and July, and I'm using that as my basis, just like an owner would with comps.
Sure.
They're looking 2 or 3 months in the rear view at rent comps, and they're thinking, well, I can really get $2,100 a month for this. They put it up for rent at $2,100. How much does that cost a week in vacancy?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, exactly.
This is the thing is people get stuck on $50, $100 a month, and it's costing them way more every single
Right.
week that it stays vacant.
Right, right. So to circle it back to one of our failures before, we had an owner who had a really dated property. It was super cute, one of these like craftsman style down by BSU, and they were insistent upon getting $3,000 for a 3-bedroom. No, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
So we tried talking them down, tried educating, showing them the comps and whatnot. Got them down to about $2,800, but it's sitting and it's sitting and it's sitting and it's sitting. And that property, we marketed everything we possibly could for this property. We did, all hands on deck. If we had another 3-bedroom that, we had 3 applications on. Oh, I'm so sorry. We screen first come, first serve. You were not first in line. Would you like to look at any of our other 3 bedrooms?
Yeah.
So we tried to, share this property as much as we could. And 4 months it sat on the market. And they were not going to budge because they had the best property on the block and they've owned it forever. And they've never had a problem getting exactly what they wanted in rent. This was also their first time with a manager. Maybe you need to shuffle the pictures around. Oh yeah, that's going to do it. Like, no, ultimately it is the price point and it's not us failing. It is the market speaking. And if the market is speaking to you and saying you haven't had any showings in 3 weeks, guess what? That's not us. I promise you.
Yeah.
We have 300 doors. We've been doing this for nearly 20 years, 12 years really well. But this is the price point.
Yep.
And you're sitting there. So 4 months of loss. And they just, it never dawned on them that, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I should listen to this professional.
Thousands of
hired.
dollars. Unbelievable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And when you actually hold that mirror up to them and say, you would have had $10,000 in your account if you would have listened to us at the beginning. Like, I'm sorry,
It's
but
a tough lesson to learn.
It is a tough lesson.
Yeah. So how about lawn care? This is an interesting
yeah.
one. I think most people, at least from an investor point of view, don't want to pay for lawn care, right? Because in the summer months, that hurts your cash flow. It can be anywhere from an extra $100, $150 a month. Mm-hmm. If there's sprinkler repairs needed, if there's fertilizer needed, that can really add up. What do you see?
Why? It's so funny. I love this coincidence. I was just talking to a fairly new landlord in the long-term space. Yep. And we're kind of just coaching each other and whatnot. But I was talking with them just yesterday about this exact topic. And, they were saying, well, how do you approach lawn care in general? And in all honesty, if you have an A or B class rental, I think that you need to provide it because the people that are renting A and B class rentals are assuming that they're getting A and B class service.
Yes.
Now, that's not to say that a C-class property shouldn't get A-class service, right? That hospitality needs to be there. But as far as the asset itself, so an A or B class property is probably newer. It probably has a ton of amenities, maybe an HOA. If that HOA, I can guarantee you that they'll go out and they'll say, "Oh, this grass is taller than 4 inches, and I need you to have
I
it
know
cut."
I've gotten those letters.
Yeah, well, it's kind of silly, the
Yeah.
HOA police, right? But if you have that type of an asset, I would strongly recommend, maybe you charge $50 more in rent.
Yeah.
Over the year, that kind of helps offset the cost. Also, your yard is one of your biggest amenities at this property. So a tenant is never going to care for your yard the way that you would as the homeowner. So a lot of times, it's hard to bite that bullet, but it's better to provide the service and know that it's taken care of professionally.
Some of my experiences, if you will, with
Yeah.
lawn care. So absolutely, A and B class, you should totally provide it. Not only is it saving yourself from future damage when you
Yep.
go to sell a property now, if they
all
haven't
weeds.
been, and it's all
Yeah.
weeds, or
Yeah.
God forbid, they haven't been running the sprinkler system and you have to
Right.
resod
Yep.
or something like that. Like that is thousands and thousands of dollars,
Mhm.
and you're going to have time delay because now you want to sell the property or you need to relist it for rent. Well, this looks like crap.
Yeah.
Guess what? People buy or go see the property based on pictures, right? Both
Right.
on the rent
Yeah.
side and on the sale side. So I've learned that the hard way multiple times where I've been tempted to say, yeah, but that lawn care costs, it's quite a bit.
Right.
And I know it's always a conversation with you, which I really appreciate because every once in a while we do get that kind of tenant that is like, a prideful tenant and they really actually want to take care of
Yeah.
it themselves.
Right.
And so there are circumstances where that can happen and we can have confidence that that's going to happen.
Right.
So it's not necessarily a rigid thing, but
Yeah. Yeah. And there are times that we pivot. I know that we recently had a property where for a year it was managed professionally by a landscaper. And then the second year when we went to renew, we repealed that. We rolled it off because they were oftentimes doing it themselves anyway.
Yep.
So yeah, that does happen. The other thing that's nice about having a landscaper go weekly is this is the point that I had forgotten. If you have a good relationship with that vendor, then it's kind of like you have spies. You have eyes on the property weekly. I know for our management company, we're driving by at least monthly, but a lot can happen in a month, especially if it's 108 degrees out and the sprinkler in the right corner died. Well, so did that yard in a month's time, And while we like to assume that the tenant is going to report an issue with a sprinkler or report an issue at all, sometimes they don't, or sometimes it's just out of mind, or maybe they were traveling. And if you have a landscaper on the property weekly, you have another set of eyes that you can trust.
Yeah. And I think it's also what kind of professionalism, what kind of messaging are you giving to your tenants, right? Because the thing we haven't talked about yet are renewals and vacancies.
Yep.
For somebody that is in one of these A-class properties that is paying higher than market rent, right? Man, things are kind of nice here. Could I go move somewhere else and save $100 a month? Sure, but maybe I'd have a 10-minute longer commute. Maybe I'd have to take care of lawn care, right? These are the types of amenities with single-family homes that really keep people in place and get you that renewal because guess what? Every vacancy is going to cost you like 6 weeks of rent roughly.
Yep.
And that's if it doesn't need work.
Yep. Exactly. So having that amenity and having that little bell and whistle, it does make a difference and it does move the needle.
Totally.
Sure.
And it gets you a higher quality tenant as well. Less risk of them not paying. They tend to be people that take care of the property better. There's just another level of service and I guess almost like a bar of an understanding with tenants when it comes to that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, if you set the bar here, then they're going to know this is what's expected. And I think that's, and also they're going to have that understanding that, and we're going to perform here too.
Totally.
So it's that reciprocity and having that mutual respect for each other and the contract and the expectation.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, hey, if you destroy the property, like that's going to come out of your security deposit. Likewise, if there's a leak or there's some kind of maintenance issue, we're going to jump on that and we're going to get it fixed.
Yeah.
And I think that expectation setting, both written and unwritten, is everything.
Certainly.
Okay. renter landlord stories.
Oh boy. Okay.
So I've got some pretty good ones. And by good, I mean just stuff you don't hear about all the time. Now, granted, please take this with a grain of salt. The only reason that I'm bringing this up is because it's kind of fun to talk about and interesting to learn about different scenarios. And I think having a greater understanding of risk and what could happen, both good and bad, helps you become a better investor and a better property manager. Actually, before we talk about those stories, you guys have now positioned your property management company to be very picky about who you accept and take on. And I think this is the coolest part about being a business owner, right? Now, not only have you guys traded some of those C-class properties for a little bit nicer properties, maybe better locations, less maintenance, less headache involved, but you've also designed your avatar of the owner that you want to work with to your liking and what fits your guys' lifestyle. Can you talk about that? Yeah.
Certainly. We do have an owner scorecard. It's kept
I love that.
very under the table. We have one for clients as well on the real estate side. But some components of what would go into that would be if the owner is super inflexible on price, perhaps there's financial distress. You know, if they have a mortgage of $3,000 and the property is really only worth $2,400 in rent, that's going to be a problem. We don't want to take on what could be, a liability. In fact, we learned that lesson a couple of years ago where we took on what we thought was an accidental landlord. Mom had stepped in to rescue her daughter who owned the property, went through a nasty divorce.
Okay.
And so now mom is kind of co-owner of the property, or so we were told. About 3 months into the lease with these new tenants, they called our office frantic and they said, "We just got served foreclosure notice. Do we have to move?" Like, wait, what? So
oh dear,
somebody had delivered, and I don't know how it got in their hands because their names weren't on it at all. It was the owner of the property, but they figured out that the house was going to be foreclosed on. And it's something like they were given 30 days or something. And it was just, oh, okay. So rule number one, if you are in that level of financial distress, we can't represent you.
Yeah, of
ethically,
course.
I can't put people in there and then, bounce them.
Yeah,
and it all worked out that,
Sure.
we immediately called the owner and talked her through it. And, here we are sending her rent check every month and thinking, you should be having funds to cover this mortgage, but you haven't been paying it. What is going on? So that's one of the things. What other? Oh, if they have too much of a personal connection. An owner that we recently fired is best friends with the neighbor, and the neighbor doesn't like that this new tenant has a little boy who accidentally kicks a ball over the fence and goes into his yard to retrieve it. So obviously all of the red flags of like familial, discrimination among familial class, they didn't want kids in this house. They think that kids are going to wear and tear, and especially little boys, which quite frankly, I have 3, so I know wear and tear from little boys.
Sure.
Anyway.
But that's what a security deposit is for, by the way.
That's what a security deposit is for.
Come on. What do they do? Drawn on the walls and it needs touch-up paint?
Exactly. Yep.
Seriously.
And, but this owner would get a phone call at 10 p.m. on a Friday or Saturday night from the neighbor who he's besties with and say, "I'm going to report to the HOA because your tenants are in my backyard again." He ran in to grab a ball. He's doing it again. And they're having a barbecue next door and it's kind of loud. Yeah, really? So if you have too much personal involvement with the property, or you have too many connections, I'm out.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to, if you have the neighborhood spies that, of course, there's always going to be a busybody, but I'm talking that interpersonal connection with somebody that is actively checking up on you. No, you hired me to manage your property, not to micromanage me.
Right. But here's the theme here, right? When you're the best, you can be picky about the people that you.
Well, thank you.
Just like if you're hiring in your organization, you can be picky about who you bring on. When you have a good service, you have people that care, you have a good culture, right? I mean, everything that Heather's talking about, she genuinely cares deeply about not only the people that she works with, but the tenants as well. And this goes into like everything that you've built around being a business owner and taking that action to get started when it was scary, Fast forward 10 years, to be able to quit the teaching job and have some more of that freedom. And now fast forward to really be able to pick the clients that you want to work with, because let's face it, there's a lot of property management companies out there that treat this more transactionally. And they're like, how many doors can we accumulate?
Right.
How many doors can we manage? Talk to me about like why you guys haven't taken that approach.
Interesting.
Because you've had the opportunity, you guys
Sure.
could be managing probably thousands of units right now. It's not a demand thing.
It's not. It's definitely
choice.
not. It is a choice, and it's not a capacity thing either. I feel like our team is very, very educated and very supported. I feel like right now we probably could easily manage 400 doors with the team that we have in place. We have some pretty rad people.
Yeah.
But it is more about quality, and it is more about relationship. And when we look at an investor or when we're bringing on a new client, it's definitely, hey, we're a partnership. And if you don't see us as equals, then this isn't going to work. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, there are numbers. Yes, there's bottom lines. I get that. I respect that. But I need to be able to, in Blue Fishing, have you read the book Blue Fishing?
Great book.
Yeah. So
Yes.
he speaks about
Reciprocity.
the chug test. Do you remember this?
No, I don't.
Okay.
But
So if you see somebody across the street that you manage a property or that is your property manager, would you cross the street and chug a beer with them? Like, would you?
Yes.
So can they pass the chug test? If you genuinely, their name appears on caller ID and you're cringing, that they don't pass the chug test. And you definitely want to be able to, I see you as an equal. I don't think that we have some kind of a tiered relationship, you know?
Right.
I feel like you're always going to pass the chug test.
Yes.
And hopefully Corby and I do for you as well.
Multiple chugs.
So that's really important. So no, we're not just taking everybody on. I know that we've gone to some national conferences as well, and property managers, the broker owner property management conference that we go to every year. One of the things that they talk about is, what is your churn rate? Excuse me?
Yeah.
I don't even calculate a churn rate because I get into business with somebody and we want to keep them. So
yours is low.
Ours is very low.
Yeah, I would imagine yours is incredibly low.
It's pretty low. Yeah. And that's kind of by design. And it's not something, I don't mean to sound flippant, but it's just, we go into this with our eyes wide open and we look at things in terms of partnerships.
Yeah. I think churn rate is absolutely, regardless of business, this is an indication of the quality of service or product that you provide. If you have a low churn rate, which for those of you that don't know what churn is, it means annually how many people choose not to renew with you, right? So how much turnover you have. People that have a high churn rate, they always have to be seeking new clients because every year they're losing X amount, right?
Exactly.
People that have a low churn rate, they're always building upon, they're always ahead. They're given the opportunity to choose more who they want to bring on, which really helps with their lifestyle, with their operations. I'm sure there was some point when you guys were like, what do we really want for this vision? Because if we spent money on ads or we hired a big team, we could go manage 1,000 units. Why not?
Yeah.
Did you guys have that moment?
We have thought about being more aggressive about, what if we step into the multifamily realm and we take on these multifamily communities and we can hire a local manager that lives on site. And we have thought about those things. I just don't think that it just hasn't felt like the right moment yet. I don't think we need to diversify. I think that what we have is good and we want to kind of build that up and make that robust or more robust than it is. I think that the cycle that we have between, an investor client on the real estate side and bringing them over and educating them, and now they're a management client, and then that cycle continues because they feel good about how their asset is performing and the care that we're providing, then that in and of itself is just feeding our clientele and our client base and the partnerships that we have.
Yeah,
So,
very organic. Then you have a chance to date, so to speak, before you take them on. I think that's really key. Yeah,
actually, that's a good way to put it. Yeah,
you
it
learn
really
a lot
is.
about each other.
Right.
And I think this really comes back to the best thing about real estate is the freedom and opportunity that it provides for you to
So
design your
much.
life around it.
Yeah.
And what I really admire about you and Corby is you guys, you love to travel. So I want to talk about that for
Yeah,
sure.
great.
But this is like, I know your eyes are lighting up, but this is the point, right? This is
Yeah.
what's so exciting about it. And
Yeah.
I know, like, this is why I'm speaking to the person that's thinking about jumping in or self-managing versus a property manager. If you take a long view of this and you wait 10 years, you're going to have a whole different type of life and opportunities out there. You're going to be able to choose who you work with and who you don't. You're going to be able to take trips
Yeah.
with your family,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Where's been your favorite place to visit so far?
Oh, that is a good question. I think one of my favorite trips was to Peru.
Nice.
We hit 3 different regions. So we were in Lima, so did the city kind of aspect for a while. Then, of course, Machu Picchu, Cusco in that area. And then we also spent a week in the Amazon, where we would have 2 hours a day of electricity. So 1 in the morning so they could cook breakfast, 1 in the evening so they could cook dinner, and then that
What a
was
cool
it.
experience
So,
for your
yeah,
boys, though,
yeah.
right?
Yes.
I mean,
to see
that's
the bats and to see the tarantulas and to go on the expedition to catch piranhas. My son, on his, it would have been his 9th birthday, was catching piranhas. So, like,
Wow.
that's pretty cool. I don't
That's
think I can
really
beat
cool.
that. Yeah.
Meanwhile, because we've talked a lot in the past about hiring and the team and everything, but you can go on these trips now and
I owe it to them.
and things don't blow up, right?
Right.
They run normally
Right.
and you can do this virtually. How empowering has that
Right.
been?
Yeah, it's it's a life changer. Being able to have leadership and confidence in your team. You know, we have some key players that have been absolutely instrumental into us being able to step away for long periods at a time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, long to us, 2 to 3 weeks. You know, that's quite a length of time when you have little ones.
Yeah.
So,
I think too, like, we live in London now.
Yeah.
Travel has always been a big passion of ours. I feel very, very strongly when I look at life. I'm not trying to necessarily judge people, so I won't go negative with it.
Okay.
But I will say there's an element of understanding and just experience and really perspective that you get with traveling. And you realize how lucky. I mean, I'll never forget my first trip to Africa.
Oh, that's a bucket list.
Yeah,
for us too.
like it.
Yeah.
It completely changed how I look at what I have, what I don't have.
Yep.
Comparisons to other people, especially in the social media age. Like, these are very real life experiences that you're able to provide to yourself, to your family, while they're at a young age in those formative years to have that perspective. And I
Yeah.
cannot stress how important that is, because there's a lot of people that don't have the ability, either financially, or they don't necessarily know what the benefit is to traveling and what that kind of perspective and worldly view gets you.
Right.
It's the best education there is.
It is. It is. And watching my boys play a pickup game of soccer on a concrete field with local kids that were their own age without shoes, and they tried to speak their language, but very broken.
Yeah.
But they still were able to just jump in and play and be kids and be little boys in Panama City,
Yeah.
Or one of my favorite memories was coming back from Italy, and my youngest was still in preschool. And during snack time, when he went back to preschool, he was constantly grazie, speaking, being able to meet somebody in their native tongue. And then, he forgot to turn that off. And so sweet. And being able to, show that respect for other people and other cultures and meet humans where they are at. It's pretty incredible.
We always talk about IQ, but I really think
the EQ.
The EQ, right? Traveling really plays a huge factor in this.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the coolest things about living in London is how diverse it is.
Yeah.
Literally every culture, every country is represented. Our 2.5-year-old Charlie, she's going to daycare, and like they talk about every holiday of every religion and every background and it is the coolest thing. Like she's going to learn, she's going to be so much further ahead in understanding just people in general and her place and everything. I just think that that's the coolest part about travel, and just let alone like the food, the music, the culture, like being someplace totally new and totally different. It is absolutely the coolest thing. And I think it's the coolest part about real estate is having that freedom.
Yep. That freedom, financial freedom and time. I mean, the freedom of time is huge.
Yeah. So let's end maybe with one of our favorite renter landlord stories. I can go ahead and start.
Yeah. Why don't you? I'm trying to, I'll put on my thinking cap.
Yeah. So in episode 1, I talked with Corey about an 8-unit that we have just over the border in Oregon and Ontario, and a story about that. So I'm not going to choose that one.
Okay.
How about actually a 4-plex that we recently bought in May?
Oh.
And then transitioned to you guys, the property management for, because I think this really this shows the stark contrast and quality between property management companies. So we bought a 4-plex.
Yeah.
When you buy an asset that's already rented, of course, in the state of Idaho, you have to honor all the leases of all the tenants, right? So you're taking those over. But you also, for a period, have to take over the property manager. Now, this particular property manager decided after closing to still collect rents from the tenants after we had already informed them that we would be switching property management companies. And then they withheld those rents for like 60 days.
I think it was longer.
Yeah, 90 days maybe.
It was ridiculous.
Yes. Yeah. Not only that, they collected the next month rent from a couple of the tenants, and they, correct me if I'm wrong, but they didn't transfer over the security deposits either.
No. I think that was almost 4 months in before those funds were actually liquidated.
So think about this. You buy a property,
right?
A property management collects your rents and then just sits on them.
Yeah.
And they're just chilling in their bank account. This is a real thing that can happen. So thankfully, after some legal letters and some not so nice exchanges, because they also weren't explaining why they were doing it, or they were just completely dark. And that's when you get the radar going off in your head, like, okay, there's something wrong here. Somebody's up to no good, really. So that's kind of the bad thing that can happen, and why choosing the right property manager is super important. But it's just an example of something that can happen.
Yeah. Well, and a security deposit, it's important to note, that's not the property manager's money. That's your tenant's money.
Yes.
And it's very clear that should transfer immediately upon ownership, a change of ownership. That has to be held and not commingled with rent funds. Like, what are they thinking? But that was that was a doozy. And
you probably know this better than me, but I'd be willing to bet, just given the lack of regulation, there are property management companies out there that either commingle security deposits or spend security deposits.
Oh yeah. So probably a good thing I don't remember the name, but there was
we don't need
there
to
was
name
one
names.
that was in like 6 figures worth of assets, security deposits that they had just gone away with. They just took off. We're actually still managing one of the doors from the gentleman who had his primary residence, and then he was the accidental landlord. Hired the first manager that he came across, which was this company that was charging a ridiculous, low cut rate. It was like 4 or 5% management fee. That should have been a red flag, because they were just trying to get people in the door, right? And collected the security deposit and disappeared after a few months. And that's nightmare.
Not fun.
Nightmare.
Not fun. How about your favorite tenant landlord story? There's so many. I know
there are so many. I'm trying to think of. Okay, this is kind of a fun one. We love to see our tenants succeed and ultimately become their own homeowner. In fact, on Tuesday, I know you had a meetup. We were running our first time home buyer meetup and a lot of our tenants showed up. It was great. Just trying to educate them on, if you just renewed your lease, don't shop right now. Wait until you get a little closer, and just educating them on the market or the, anyway, that's beside the point. But we do love to see our tenants succeed. And ultimately, having your own little American dream of home ownership, that's the first step in the direction to perhaps becoming your own investor.
How many other property management companies do that, by the way?
I think that I can think of one in the
Yeah,
valley,
I
but I'm
mean,
not sure.
that's
Maybe
such a
there's
cool
more.
thing.
Well,
Yeah,
thanks.
that's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's new. We're just kind of getting it off the ground, but it's really exciting to see that, this, and to have tenants' eyes opened and see like, oh, I thought I was going to rent forever. I actually, if I work on my credit, I can do this in 3 years. And we just converted one person, just that mindset conversion, and it's beautiful. So that's the good side. The bad side is we had a gal come to us and say, "Oh, I'm going to break my lease. I bought a house." Hold on. I know we're buddies.
Oh, boy.
I know that we've been,
Are
you've
you
been
sitting
drinking
down?
our Kool-Aid. It's great.
Yeah.
But you still have 4 months left on your lease. So legally, here's what the lease outlines. Here's what you're responsible for. Do you have any questions? Well, what do you mean?
Oh, boy.
Okay. So, back up, have a couple conversations, cite some, parts of the lease that are showing this information. About a week later, she came to us and she said, "I have toxic black mold in my house. I need you to let me out of the lease." I'm like, this is interesting timing.
Coincidental.
Isn't this such a coincidence? So, of course, we have great vendors that we have built a relationship with. We sent our mold specialist, our bio expert out. And they swabbed the house, they did a full inspection, and they educated the tenant that, in fact, the home is perfect. There's not 1 ounce of anything. There wasn't mildew, nothing.
Wow.
So can you please tell me what are the sources of this, and where did you find this info? Oh, okay. Well, oh gosh, that's just such a relief. I'm so glad to hear that, because I was under the impression of this, and this, and no, honey, you weren't. You were just, I understand what you were trying to do.
Yeah.
But a contract is a contract, and at the end of the day, I'm not going to shortchange my owner because great, you got a house, awesome. Now hold up your financial end of the bargain too.
Yeah.
So that's one other story that's just kind of, it was funny. It was a good little, and miraculously, she mentioned nothing else about the mold. She continued to pay the rent until we found another tenant, and it all worked out. But yeah, it was pretty funny.
That is funny. Corby and I partnered on a flip together, I think in 2019.
Oh gosh, that guy.
And that tenant.
Yes, yep. He sold rabbits.
Yes. So we were buying the property. This wasn't a rental that we had. We were buying the property from a tired landlord.
Yeah, that's right. That was.
And he had a problem tenant, and the tenant was farming rabbits in the backyard
to sell for meat.
Which, what the heck? This is Boise, Idaho. Yeah.
One of his many, like, out of the garage businesses that
Yes.
Yeah. That was funny.
That was another funny one. I remember getting those pictures like at night, and there was a picture of the backyard, and you just saw all the eyes from the flash, and it was like, whoa, what is going on here?
Yeah. I'd forgotten about him.
Yeah.
That was a funny one too.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just never know. There's always fun little, never the same, never a dull moment.
Never.
Certainly.
Yeah. So as you were describing that, and I want to give you the amount of credit where credit's due, because as you were just describing that home buyer program that you have with the tenants, this isn't what successful business owners think. This is what unsuccessful business owners think. This is what having a poor mindset is I can't help people and also run a financially viable business. This is a for-profit business. This isn't a charity. That's the complete wrong way to think about it. And you are self-sabotaging yourself, and you will never have a successful business with that mindset. What you just described is perfectly vertically integrating. You bring the tenants in, they're paying rent, which is making investors happy. You're getting the property management fee that's keeping things running on your end, your business, right? You bring them in, you educate them, you treat them like people, you genuinely care about them. Who do you think they're going to use for realtor services when the time is right to buy the house?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you've created another income stream for yourselves. Guess what? Eventually, they're probably, due to your education, going to also become real estate investors.
That's our hope.
They're going to buy other rental properties. And guess who gets the property management and all those additional realtor commissions? This is vertical integration in a business by caring about people.
Yeah.
This is such a real example of this. And people that start a business, they just don't, I don't think they have a long enough view There's this zero-sum game where they think like, if I'm making money, somebody else has to lose. If I'm losing, then somebody else is making money on me.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
not true. So I just wanted to point that out and bring that full circle.
Yeah.
It's such a good example of
Well,
like how
thank
you can
you.
run an incredibly successful business and also have that high level of fulfillment and helping your community and helping people.
It's growth mindset.
Yeah.
It's really just having that growth mindset, and that there's enough of the pie out there for anybody who wants to step in. There really is. And being able to genuinely care and put your time, resources, energy, money where your mouth is it's everybody can succeed. There's enough.
Yeah. It's also your background too. It's so relatable being teachers and working in the government, Corby working in the government and everything, right? Like
Yeah.
this is real.
Yeah.
And people can see that and be like, wow, if you guys did it, so can I.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I had my head in the sand for a full decade. So
Yeah.
you can succeed.
I love it.
So,
Well, thanks for joining us, Heather.
Yeah,
Where can
thank
people
you.
find out more about you if maybe they have a
Sure.
question about how to be a better property manager? Maybe they have a property that they might want to inquire about you managing. Where they
Sure.
can find
Yeah.
out.
So we have the boiseturnkey.com is our website. All of our contact and personal information is on there, as well as, cell phone and office phone. But yeah, just feel free to reach out. We're happy to chat. As you can tell, we get a little passionate about
Just a little.
our journey. So we're happy to share anytime.
Amazing.
So yeah.
All right. Well, that does it for this episode of the Real Freedom Podcast. Thanks so much, Heather. It was great
Thank
having you on.
you.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.